Hey everybody, it's Monday afternoon and we are going to take another trip around the world. This is a very impromptu trip. I was reminded the other day that it is overdue for another round the world, so I do want to get one done, but I've not yet been in here today, so anything interesting we might discover, we're going to be discovering together. So we're going to start here at my waterfall tank. Not too much to talk about. I did spray it for aphids again the other day. I guess I probably brought some in when I came, when I brought some flowers and plants and stuff from outside. That's just, that's the risk you take when you bring in plants from outside. You can have bugs on them, and sometimes those bugs are aphids. So I always struggle with aphids in this system here, this paludarium, whatever you want to call it, my waterfall. It's not that big a deal. I spray it with soapy water. I've never had an issue doing that. I did shoot a video about it the other day. I know a lot of people weren't terribly interested in it and watching it, but if you watched it, you'll see how I actually apply the soap and the spray and what the tank looks like before and after I did a big water change and all that good stuff. In the process, I took my peripheral plants here. I took them all outside where I was able to spray them down a little more thoroughly without any concern of overspray getting in the tank or anything. So when I brought them back in, I kind of rearranged their positions, moved them around a little bit. I guess that would be the same as rearranging their positions. But there you go, a little bit of a new look. As far as the fish go, not much to talk about. I haven't lost any fish in here recently since I lost that little string of guppies over a few day period. Other than that, everybody's in there just kind of doing their thing. And again, not much to talk about. I do have a few little pieces of plant lying there. They came out of my purple spotted gudgeon tank. I did a big trimming in there the other day, and some of the plants are still left over. I did have a viewer purchase a lot of them, so I'm down to only a few plants. You can see some Ludwigia floating over here next to that temple plant. And then you can see this big piece of temple plant that actually has a significant amount of roots on it. That's still just lying there. And it looks okay. I turned it over today. That's why it's facing sort of downward. In fact, you can actually see the tip of it starting to curl back upwards. So this is going to turn into a weird sort of curly-Q shaped plant if I keep doing that. Anyway, we've got my tank down here at the foot of my waterfall. And I really need to get in here and do some maintenance. The filter still does not have a pre-filter sponge or screen or anything on it, and so the snails are still able to crawl around and congregate on the actual intake. And it's interesting because some days I'll come in and there'll be just barely a little trickle of water, and I'll think, yeah, I really got to get in there. It's probably covered in snails. And then later it's flowing like this, which isn't, a vigorous flow or anything, but it's significant. It's not just a little drops of water. And I've come in here sometimes and there's literally, drip, drip, drip amount of water coming off of the end of that. We've also got plenty of water overflowing up here. So there's a significant amount of water flowing in this tank. And I think I inadvertently set it up so that it actually denitrifies itself. That really thick sand bed down there. You can see how deep the mulm has sort of worked its way into the sand. And then at the very bottom, I've got gravel. And then in the front face of this, where I've got a piece of Lexan glued in there with GE silicone number 2, holding that in at that 45-degree angle, I do have some holes drilled into the face of this. So water can move through here. And I guess, I don't know if it moves this way or that way or whatever, but I think I get some denitrifying effect because I never do anything to this tank other than add water to it. And every time I check it, I've got like no nitrates in it. I've got shrimp that have been living in here for years and breeding in here, and I just never have any problems with this tank. It just ticks over like a clock. It's only got a few little guppies and Endler hybrids in there. I've got a male cherry barb that was harassing my females, so I put it in this tank, and it just, again, I pull the weeds out of there as they grow on the surface, the duckweed and the water sprite. As that gets a little out of control, I pull that out occasionally, and as the water level gets low, I top it off, and that's it. And so as long as that water's flowing, I don't worry too much about it. So that will be the final look at our waterfall tank. We'll get the lights turned out. We'll start with the light shining into the tank. Then we will turn out the big whammy doodle LED here. And finally, this is another Cree LED, but that's just a standard household floodlight. So that's what it looks like, just lit by ambient room light. A lot different. So, having seen all that, we can come over here and get started having a look at my 29 miscellaneous. Now again, I'm looking at this at the same time you are. I'm trying to shoot a video and I'm trying to look at my viewfinder and the tank all at the same time, so you are very likely to spot stuff that I'm going to miss. And as far as I can see, everything looks good in here. I don't see any dead fish floating around. I don't see any dead fish up at the surface. I did remove a bunch of water sprite and stuff out of this tank on the last water change I did. It was getting a little overgrown and congested. It was making it difficult for me to feed. When I put the food in the feeding hole at the top, it was just landing on top of plants, and I had to open the lid and swirl it around. So other than that, not much that I can think of. Again, I just did the recent water change on it. It's probably, wow, look at this. How often do you see this tank where the water's not flowing through the center? In fact, we've only got it really flowing vigorously across the one side here. It's kind of interesting. We are starting to get a little backup and overflow. So this tank tends to clog up really quickly. You know what? It's probably doing that because it's not getting enough water flowing up and into it because of all that junk. When I pulled all the plants and stuff in there and did the water change, I probably got a bunch of stuff swirling around in the water, and eventually it has ended up right there. So I'm sure if I cleaned that off, we would actually start seeing a little more vigorous flow right there. So let's see what happens when we do that. I don't even care if it stays in the tank. I'll pull some of it out. It actually feels like there's some roots growing up into it. Bear with me here. Well, that did get us a little bit more water flowing. But I think there's some roots or something going up in there. Although it doesn't look, that's fairly clear. You'd be able to see if that was packed full of junk. It's interesting as to why it's not flowing as vigorously as it should be. It's probably time to get in and pull this inlet hose out and just give that a good cleaning. Those will eventually get clogged up with gunk, and so we probably need to get in there and do that. So there you go. There's a look at my 29 miscellaneous. And in case you're not familiar with it, I call this my 29 miscellaneous just because this is one of my earliest tanks, and over the years it's just held so many fish I never really named it anything specifically, whereas my 55-gallon Gourami tank once housed many gouramis and is now down to just a couple, but will eventually someday have more gouramis added back to it. So I've got two things to point out on this tank, three actually now that I'm thinking about it. First, let's start with the cyanobacteria treatment. I recently did the ChemiClean treatment again. We took the tank from being sort of covered in that reddish purpley looking color to this. I have not done anything since that last video, so for my regular viewers who remember, we still had a little bit of that reddish color on the glass and a little bit up there. That's still there. Most of what was on the spray bar seems to have died off and gone away and have been eaten away by the various algae-eating fish in the tank. And the rest of the tank looks good. It doesn't look orange anymore. You can see the color of the wood, you can see the color of the rocks, you can see the texture and everything. And we do have some green algae starting to develop and grow in there, but that is definitely algae and not cyanobacteria. If it was, the ChemiClean would have killed it off. So that is the first thing. Now, the second thing, looking at my little honey gourami here, is I had someone point out the other day that they didn't notice my thick-lipped gourami and asked me where it was and, you know, what had happened to it. When he asked me, I had to scratch my head because I thought, you know what? I don't remember seeing that in a while. And I came down and I looked, and sure enough, it wasn't in here. And I looked at a few videos back, and it wasn't in the tank either. So I have no idea when that thick-lipped gourami vanished out of this tank. But I never noticed it looking sick. I never noticed it behaving unusually. It just apparently wasn't in there one day. And I find it interesting how I can have tanks with fish that just vanish, and I don't even notice that they vanished. I mentioned in a video the other day how I tend to not focus on the fish when I look at my tanks. I tend to talk about the tank and the environment or the plants or what I'm doing to the tank or the treatment of the tank. And I just kind of let people look at the fish if they want while I'm talking about it. I don't spend that much time looking at my fish, believe it or not, as silly as that sounds. I almost see the fish as being animals that swim around in my gardens. And I see the tanks more like aquatic gardens and aquatic environments than I do places for fish to live. I don't know. It's an unusual sort of way of looking at it. But it's funny that I can just simply not notice when a fish vanishes, especially a fish like that one. That was actually one of my favorite fish. And it just has me kind of scratching my head as to how my brain works, as to why I don't notice stuff like that. If you asked me to give you a rundown on all the fish I have in all my tanks, I couldn't do it to save my life. I couldn't tell you the number of fish I have in my tanks or anything like that. And it's often when somebody points out that, hey, what about this fish? I'll say, hey, you're right. What about that fish? I haven't seen it in a while either. And that's when I notice it's gone. So there you go. My thick-lipped gourami is no longer with us, apparently. And I have no idea why or when. But I will, here's a good segue for you, consider the possibility that it was my striped Raphael, whose tail you can see wiggling around right there. I shot some video the other day, and he came out during a feeding, and I did not realize how big and fat and round that fish is. I also did not notice how big its mouth has gotten, and I really had no idea how it came out and gobbled the food up. I had algae wafers all over the bottom of the tank, and it came out and just hoovered them up, gone. I threw some shrimp pellets in, gone. I began to wonder whether the other fish in the tank would ever even get any food at that rate. And so it's possible maybe that the striped Raphael ate it, and not necessarily while it was alive. It may have died and drifted to the bottom of the tank and gotten gobbled up one night, and I just simply never saw its body. But again, I have no idea what happened to it. The only reason I could think that it vanished would be it got stuck somewhere and simply rotted away without me ever noticing, or it possibly got eaten by that big striped Raphael. And that brings me to, what am I going to do with this big striped Raphael? Because it's clearly getting too large to be in that tank, and I'm not exactly sure what I want to do with it yet. I've got a few options, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to have a whole video talking about what I may or may not do with the striped Raphael, but make note that I am thinking about it. I do know that it's way too big. I do know that I have options, and I am considering things, because when you move fish around, you change the dynamics of the tank. Not only the dynamics of the interactions of the fish in the community, but you change the chemical balance of the tank. You change the tank's chemistry. You can really shift the way a tank changes. I've made minor changes in the past, and then suddenly had a tank where I couldn't get on top of the algae anymore, or just things happen when you make big changes to tanks. So moving something that large, is that dominant of a presence in the tank, and putting it in a different tank is going to change not only this tank, but whatever tank it goes in. And again, that includes the community of whatever tank I consider putting it in, and the habitat, and is there places for it to live and hide, and that sort of thing. So we're thinking about it. Make sure you're subscribed. You won't miss any video of that whenever I decide what to do. So moving on to my 55-gallon tank. Not much to talk about in this one, so I won't spend too much time on it. I shot a video 2 days ago, I think, Saturday night, and we had a good long focus on my diamond tetras there. They're absolutely stunning fish. I'll put a link to that video if you want to just have a good long look at my diamond tetras. My angelfish here, nothing wrong with it, but it just seems really nervous and sketched out all the time now. Every time I walk past it, it darts and dashes. I'm afraid it's going to bang its head into something. I'm wondering if it doesn't get hassled sometimes by the tetras here. I've never really seen them do it, but this fish always looks like he's looking over his shoulder, so to speak. And again, whenever I walk past, a lot of times it dashes and darts out of the way. And I've had the thing for years. It's not like it's, it should come running up to the glass like a puppy dog when I walk in the room. That's what most angelfish do when they see the person that feeds them come in the room. This one freaks out. And it seems odd that it's that nervous all the time. It is a green giant, by the way, if you're wondering. I know it looks like it's a teal blue, sort of depending on how the light shines on it. It looks like it's a lot of different colors. But it looks like a sort of bluish color, but it is actually a green giant, is the name of the type of angelfish it is. Oh, I can't think of anything else really to talk about. In this tank, my big old pleco's sitting out on the bottom right there. We can have a look at this one for a moment. We might get to see one in another tank as we move around the corner here in a moment. Again, not 100% sure what that is. I think it's a gold spot pleco. Not sure, but I think it's a gold spot pleco. I bought it at PetSmart as a high-finned spotted pleco, and that's all the information you get. They don't give you an L number or anything else. And those lines you see there are actually 1-inch designations. So if you want to actually line it up and measure it and count it or whatever, you'll see how big that actually is. So that's my high-finned spotted pleco. Again, I think it's a gold spot, not a gold nugget, a gold spot pleco, which are not really nearly as fancy as a gold nugget. I'd love to have a gold nugget. So moving on to my, at the time I'm going to say most neglected tank here, my 40 breeder. This once upon a time was my African tank, and then it was my black ghost knifefish tank, and then my black ghost knifefish eventually died, and so now it's just a 40 breeder. But it is my oldest tank down here as far as being set up specifically to look like something and have a certain, community in it. Again, my miscellaneous tank was just a tank that sort of happened. I sort of put it together and threw fish in it. This tank, I sat down and I thought about it and I planned. I went out, I looked for the wood, I looked for the rocks. I knew, what color and shape I was looking for, what sort of textures I was looking for. And I really planned this tank out. And it's just kind of sat like that ever since. I know I talk about this every time we look at it, and it never changes. But here we go again. I still have not gotten in here and done anything other than basic maintenance. I've done some water changes and, wiped the glass down. It's probably due to have the glass wiped down again here pretty soon. And the number of fish in this tank is also one that slowly has dwindled over time. And we're down to couple of rainbow fish, a few Raspora hats. I got a little guppy in there, and then of course my Crenocycla, who I've not seen since we've been over here, which is unusual. She usually comes out looking to see if I'm going to feed the tank. And then I've got a few rubber lips. You can see one's on that rock right there. I'm thinking about pulling 2 of those Siamese algae eaters out and putting them in my 125. And leaving the other 2 in here. They don't really need to be in a group. I could spread them all out and put one in each tank. And I'm definitely going to have to come back around and have a look for my Crenocycla. Is that her back there? That almost looks like her back there, but I'm not entirely sure. I think that's just a branch. But that's going to be interesting if anything happened to her. Again, she was not a shy or reclusive fish, and I'm getting a little concerned that we're not seeing her. I almost always see her as soon as I walk up to the tank, and I don't anymore. And I know as of yesterday at least, I was just looking at her, and when I fed the tank, I watched to make sure she ate because I knew it was the kind of food that she didn't particularly care for, the flake food. So she looked perfectly normal and natural and healthy and was feeding as of last night, and now I do not see her. So, interesting. We will have to keep our eyes out and see what's going on with that. But moving on, my 125-gallon New World tank. This is my current, I'm in love with tank right now. It's really, really shaped up nicely. It's shaped up very much how I envisioned it quite a long time ago. Again, when I found that piece of wood out at Pretty Boy Reservoir, I just instantly knew that was going to look amazing in the tank, or at least I envisioned it looking amazing in the tank. It was still kind of a toss of the dice as to whether I was actually going to be able to get it to go in there and how I was going to get it to be able to look, but it certainly worked out because it looks awesome. I really love the way the fish interact with it. You can see down here how clean and smooth it is because I have another one of those high fin spotted plecos. and it comes out at night and scours this wood. You can see all the wood grain. That's from the pleco teeth scraping it. You can even see this piece of wood up here. This branch gets scraped clean. Of course, this down here, this piece of wood in the front of the glass likewise. And it just looks great. I absolutely love it. The, whatever these things are called, silver dollars, nipped the plants, but I'm not having too much trouble with it. I've got the Anubias down here, which is like chewing on linoleum, so they don't seem to bother that. The snails I have in the tank, I've got nearite snails. They actually clean up that really dark green algae you can see. That's actually green spot algae. There's just so much of it that it covers everything and effectively becomes one big spot. But the nearite snails take care of that and do a good job on it. And they don't really damage the leaves too much. The dead edges and, you know, the crinkled bits and stuff like that get chewed on. But the leaves itself, the good healthy parts of the leaves, get left alone. And it's the same with the Java I've got up here, this Java fern. It gets chewed on and nipped on a little bit, but mostly where it sort of dies off at the edges, where the algae growth on it gets to be too much, and we get that sort of, you know, decomposing leaf material. That gets chewed off and nibbled on, but the green living part of the leaf seems to get left alone. And then, of course, there's my big pleco back there against the glass you can see right now. That's another one of those same ones we were just looking at. And then, of course, when you get up above the tank and you see what I've got going on with the water sprite and the way that's growing up and out of the tank, that looks fantastic, even though down here you don't see a huge mass of roots hanging into the tank. That looks more akin to what you would see in my Gourami tank, the way the Gouramis chew up the roots on the water sprite, except the Gouramis chew it up so bad I can't really even keep water sprite in that tank. I try, but they just destroy it. I guess now that I'm down to 2 Gouramis, I've got that Moonlight and the other one, I guess we could probably do something with putting some water sprite in that tank now too. So again, I'll say make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss that. That is my spotted tilapia. That is my one fish that from a biotope point of view is out of place. This is a New World tank, and by New World I mean anything that was discovered, and I'm making air quotes there, anything that was discovered, you know, after the 1200s or whatever, the North America, South America, Central America, the islands, the Caribbean, all that kind of stuff is all considered New World. And all the fish in this tank are from the New World except for that spotted tilapia, which is a West African fish. But I've never been a stickler for biotopes and anything, so I don't care. I still call this my New World tank, if you were wondering about that. Either why I call it the New World tank or why it's got an African fish in it. There's your answer to both of those questions. So moving on. I'm not going to turn the fan off because we're not going to be here for too long. So if you can hear the humming of that fan, just put up with it for a minute. We'll be moving away from it in a moment. This is my purple spotted gudgeon tank. I got in here the other day and I removed a lot of plant material. Some of which we saw at the beginning of this video, if you remember way back then, floating in my waterfall tank. So a lot of that got pulled out of there, a lot of that temple plant, a lot of what was growing way up, almost up here to the light. I cut all that down and cut all those branches and everything off. Some of them are still right here. Some of them clearly did not adjust too well to being snipped, but I think will recover. At first I thought they were going to die, but now it actually looks like they're trying to perk back up a little bit. So depending on how brutally I cut them, we'll see whether they recover or not. But a lot of this stuff is just in the tank, and I'm waiting to go in the other room and get it into my grow out tanks. I'm actually about to get a little more serious with my selling plants. I'm even considering going on eBay, and therefore I want to get all my grow out stuff set up in like real tanks with real, you know, aeration and planted plants and all that kind of stuff, rather than just, you know, that. So we'll see how that plays out. Once again, I'll remind you, make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss any of that when I start doing it, because I'm sure I'll shoot some video about it. Fish-wise in this tank, I've got catfish on the bottom that we never see because it always hides. And right now I've got my purple spotted gudgeon, who I'm sure is loving all of this, but is making it really difficult for me to feed. I did see him over here the other day and was able to get a little bit of short video of it. And then last night when I fed the tank, it was over here again. and I didn't get my camera, but I was able to actually feed it over on this side of the tank. So tonight when I come in here to feed, I will bring my camera, and I'll set the camera up on the tripod if the fish is on this side of the tank, and we'll get some feeding video of that purple spotted gudgeon. And it's nothing really exciting, it's just little pellets, cichlid pellets is what I feed it, but you'll get to see it dashing around and gobbling up sinking cichlid pellets. So my 125 here, we'll sort of do a walk past and get over in front of the waterfall, and that will enable us to see the whole tank in all its glory, even though it once again needs a haircut really bad. I got to get in and wipe the front glass down. And this tank is actually one of the tanks I was thinking about when I was talking about how I make some changes and then I always have issues with it afterwards. I did put the angelfish in this tank recently, and I don't think that caused me any problems, but I got in there and I trimmed out a lot of plants and removed a bunch of stuff, and ever since then I've been having problems with algae growing on the glass. I had a huge mass of Java Windelov that was growing on top of that piece of wood, and I pulled that out. I did stick a little chunk underneath of there to sort of get it started growing again. I'm trying to cover up that sort of sawed off, unnatural, blunt looking bit of wood right there. That doesn't look very natural to me. And that Java Windelov covered it up very nicely. It almost looked like the bushy crown of a branchy tree. And so when I took that out, it changed the way the light shines in the tank, and it changed the amount of nutrients that were being absorbed in the tank, and so on and so forth. And so now I'm dealing with more algae than I'm used to again for some reason. So I don't know if you saw it over there. I've got my snakeskin gouramis drifting around, kind of hiding. Not sure why that one's not very outgoing. I guess it all just depends on the personality of each individual fish. I've had snakeskin gouramis in the past, and they've always seemed to be fairly outgoing fish and not very shy. And that one seems to be fairly shy and not very outgoing. My clown loaches I recently treated for, I will say, intestinal parasites. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, but it seems to have been the case. The one was very skinny. It died, unfortunately, during the treatment process. The other one was sort of skinny, and I know it's kind of doing that thing again where it's just in the back laying up against the heater, but mostly I see it out and about now. It comes out during feeding time, and it actively feeds at the surface when I'm either putting flakes or the freeze-dried krill in there. My Tanapoma there eats the freeze-dried krill every night. That's his staple food. And the clown loaches love that krill. And so I've seen that one out and feeding again. It doesn't seem to be as skinny, but I'm still keeping a very close eye on it. I'm still very aware that the way I treated it did not kill the parasites that were inside of it, but simply stunned them. And the idea is the fish will then pass them out of their body, and then you have to like gravel vac them and get them out of the tank. But for fairly obvious reasons, I don't think I would be able to clean all of the parasites out of the tank. So if they're going to reinfect the fish, which is entirely likely, it's something that will be possibly an ongoing problem until I can just eradicate them. I do have some medicated food that is designed to actually kill the parasites, but the loaches don't seem to like it very much. In fact, none of the fish seem to like it very much. But I am still putting that in the tank at times, and some of it is getting eaten a little bit. So I think a combination between the two medications should eventually eradicate it. And once I've seen a continued period of fattening up, that loach back there just getting healthier and healthier over a period of time, I'll feel a little more confident that we're out of the woods. But for right now, it's still a little skinny and still a little on the, I won't say lethargic side, but maybe not quite as active as it used to be. So again, we're going to keep an eye on that. Otherwise, just, need to get in there and do some maintenance on it, which is, never-ending story around here. Moving on to my 20-gallon angelfish tank. Not too much to talk about in this tank. I will say, though, that the animal I spend more time watching in this tank than any other animal is that snail right there. That mystery snail absolutely fascinates me. It is so active. It's always crawling around the tank somewhere, and I spend a lot of time in the other room, and when I look through the doorway from where I sit, I can see in the end of this tank lengthwise from the left side here would be our point of view. And I often see that snail crawling on the glass. I see it crawling on that woodwork or on the plants. I also happen to be able to look in the end of the tank and see that cave where my clown pleco lives, and I get to watch that clown pleco being out and about quite a bit. I'm always happy to see that fish out. I really like the clown plecos as much as I like the rubber lips. It doesn't seem to be as active at cleaning the tank as a rubber lip does, but it still clearly comes out at night and scrapes and scours the wood, because you can see how clean the wood is. That's way cleaner than it can be accounted for just by having the snail in there. You can actually see the scrape marks from the teeth. And I know snails do have little teeth that they scrape with, but it's not the same as that forward and backward scraping that you get with the pleco. With the snails, it's more of this sort of pinching, scraping together motion that leaves little weird patterns on things when they scrape. The plecos leave a very distinctive pattern as well, and I can tell that's why that wood is so clean like that. The plants are so clean because of that snail, and the glass stays as clean as it does mostly because of the snail. Although I do see some of the pleco scrape marks on the glass too sometimes. Almost looks like we're getting a little bit of that red cyanobacteria growing in there. You can see we've still got some of the green cyanobacteria. I did get in here recently and manually remove a lot of it with a siphon. I was going to treat it with ChemiClean, but I've removed so much of it manually that I just don't really have to anymore. The tank looks fine. I'm not worried about that little bit of green growing in the back. When it gets to be a problem again, I'll get in there and I'll either do another siphon or I'll simply throw a ChemiClean treatment in there and we'll be done with it, and no big deal. Probably going to get in here and remove this big overgrown piece of water sprite and replace it with a smaller one, and then we can just again sit back and watch this one, the new one, get bigger and bigger and bigger. But what happens is it just gets so big that even though I thin it out as much as I can, between the Java and the roots, it takes up so much of the tank. I called this my angelfish tank. There really is an angelfish in there. You can see it, back there swimming around. But it doesn't have a whole lot of room to do its thing. So probably get in there and thin that water sprite out in the fairly near future. So moving on over to my 40-gallon Brackish tank. There's my figure 8 puffer butterbean. I'm going to go ahead and turn the forward light on. I should have probably done this before we started the video. I don't normally run this light. I just turn it on for the sake of shooting video. And I now believe that Butterbean has this tank all to himself. I've not seen any of the gobies in a long time. The last living goby I saw was weeks ago. And I know I had 2 orange sailfin mollies in here. One of them died quite a while ago. And then I had one die a couple of weeks ago, and that was the last of the other fish that I had in this tank. But I got quite a few years out of those mollies. They were full grown when I got them, so I have no idea how big they were. But I had them for maybe 4 years myself. So, I'm not complaining. They were really expensive, but I still got my money's worth out of them in the long run. So not much to talk about in this tank. I haven't gotten in here and done any maintenance. This is another one of my, I'll call it neglected tanks. I'm sure the nitrates in there are pretty high, but the total dissolved solids in this tank are really high too. I call it my Brackish tank, but it's not. I don't really keep the water at Brackish levels anymore. It's close, but it's not quite Brackish anymore. And my plants definitely appreciate it. It's all just Java fern in here, and that can tolerate Brackish water. But, it struggles in Brackish water. So Butterbean also seems to be doing better now that I've brought the salinity down. He had these white lesions all over him. And he still does a little bit. You can still see little spots here and there. But it's nothing near like it used to be. So I'm also wondering if it's not just stress, because he's never liked being around other fish. When I got him, I don't even know how many years ago, but when I got him, I used to have him in a 20 long, and I had rainbow fish in the tank, and I had guppies and mollies and platies, and basically any sort of smallish kind of fish that would live in brackish water I had in the tank. And I had shrimp in the tank, and it really stressed him out. And that's why over time he's ended up in this 40-gallon tank. And I figured, a couple of mollies or a couple of platies or something like that in the tank along with him wouldn't be that big a deal. He's got room to get away from them and everything. And so I thought everything was fine. But I'm almost wondering if those markings weren't due to stress or something, because now that he's in here by himself, that almost seems to be having as a significant of an impact on those markings as me changing the salinity. So I'm going to leave him be. I'm not going to add any more fish back to this tank. We're going to leave it as just, Butterbean's tank there. I'm still going to call it my brackish tank because that's just what it's been forever. Again, that's more of a name of the tank, in my opinion, than the actual description. But there you go. So here we are all the way back around the world to my 29 miscellaneous. We did a long one this week, 35 minutes, almost 36 minutes. So I'm going to say thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. You never know what you're going to get with me. Thanks again, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.